All right, we will call the EDA meeting to order and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Seeing no changes to the agenda, do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We have an agenda. On to the consent. Any questions or items of clarification for that? Otherwise, I would take a motion to accept or approve the consent agenda.
I'll motion.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? And the consent agenda is approved. No public hearings, so we'll go on to the business. The economic development, strategic planning, and specifically the infrastructure.
So, as we discussed previously with the board, this is a two-part series on the relationship between infrastructure and development. Tonight's more of the high-level concepts and background on infrastructure and the relationship in general. And then the 201 will be at our next meeting, where we'll basically apply that specifically to Elko New Market and where infrastructure both provides opportunities and challenges for us from an economic development standpoint.
And a quick reminder to turn your mics on if you're going to speak so we can have a higher quality video going forward.
So everybody at the Council DS knows me, but for those that don't, I'm Rich Revering. I'm the city engineer for Elko New Market, and I work for Bolton Bank, so I'm the consultant to the city. And Luke over there is going to take my place in about 3 months. So we've got a lot to cover, so I'm just going to jump right into this. You've probably all seen this figure or a variation of it during your orientations. It will come up again and again as I refer back to different types of components of the infrastructure system in Elko New Market. We are going to tackle this in the typical order of acquisition and construction. So we start with, we have to have rights of way and easements to do anything. Then they'll typically do mass grading, then they'll install sanitary sewer, then water mains, storm sewers, finally streets. Private utilities and lighting fall in there, walks and driveway aprons after that, boulevard restoration, and then final asphalt signage and markings. Won't spend a lot of time on those last four, but they are important also. So first of all, rights of way. I suppose you might not normally think of that as infrastructure, but it's essential because without it, we can't do anything. We have to have a place that the city owns or the public owns to put this stuff. So the right-of-way is indicated crudely by these red lines on each side. So that land in between there is called the right-of-way. It's city-owned property. Beyond that, there are black lines you can see that go along parallel to the right-of-way and then actually also go back in between each house in this particular image. If this was a commercial or industrial development, the same concepts apply, but the lots might be bigger. But everything still has to be there for them to operate as well. The rights of way are very precious, even though they're typically dedicated by a developer to the city. If you add up the land area of all your rights of way, it's a considerable, not just monetary value, but it allows you to operate as a city. So I guess there's just caution in there not to give them away too easily. The width and alignment will be per city code and policy documents and county access limits. And I already mentioned the easements, but they're also important. So we'll spend more time talking about the timing and challenges of each of these pieces as we go through. So we have to have a right-of-way recorded, meaning it's yours, before any public infrastructure works begins. We might allow grading to happen, but not anything else, because we don't want to get 1,000 feet of sewer built. Something goes wrong at the development level, the project falls through. Now we've got this huge investment on somebody else's property. So that's probably the main reason we do not start any hard infrastructure until those rights-of-way are procured. Right-of-way has to go to and through a parcel. So if you imagine a piece of land that's sitting in the middle of a field that somebody owns, but it doesn't abut another road, there's no way to get to it. So you have to bring right-of-way to that parcel before you can develop. And then we require developers to bring rights-of-way through a parcel because that avoids future to the parcel problems. We always plan ahead so that access can be made to the next parcel down the line, so to speak. Even if that right-of-way won't be used for some indefinite period, decades even, it has value and we want to acquire that when it's opportune. Very difficult to get it later. Partial rights-of-way can delay or obstruct orderly development. So imagine a road that's planned to be on a property line, for example. And one developer comes in, develops, gives you half the right-of-way, but you don't have that other half for who knows how long. That can really be a problem. So we are trying to use planning going forward to avoid that to the extent we can. And then finally, and this is probably a big deal, city has the power to obtain rights-of-way, but it's costly, it takes time, and it can be pretty divisive. If a landowner next to another landowner doesn't want to give that right-of-way and we want to buy it, and they oppose it, there's a lengthy court process we have to go through, multiple appraisers, the value ends up being pretty high. So eminent domain is what it's called, and that's something we can do, we have done, but we prefer to avoid.
An example of how it might hold up a project is when the school was being built. There was a need to get some right-of-way for property owner for turn lane. That property owner, while initially indicating cooperativeness, decided to not provide it at some point, and it cost the construction season for the public infrastructure, for a portion of the public infrastructure related to that project and access to that project. So decisions, the ability to acquire it, and judicious decision on when you utilize the powers that we have can have a big impact on the timing and viability of projects.
And so before you move on to the next piece, are there any areas or land in Elko, New Mexico right now where there's like a lack of right-of-way or easements or things that are problematic that could like inhibit future development, or things that stand out that you know, like this area, we have a problem?
So I have two thoughts. One, I can't think of one right now. And number two, I think we would get into that in round two, the next meeting. But
Yes.
we'll capture your question and we'll see if we have some. There's undoubtedly going to be some that come up. All right. Mass grading. You might not think of grading as infrastructure, but without it, pretty hard to do infrastructure. So in this figure, if you imagine this fat red line that kind of bobs up and down across the screen as the original shape of the land at that particular location, that's what it looked like when it was field, but we want over here, we want it to be lower for this house, we want it to be level for the street, we want to fill this hole in the boulevard and so forth. Mass grading is pretty much done on every development, whether it's commercial, industrial, residential sites. It's also called rough grading. So we're bringing that original land shape close to the land, to the end land shape that we want by taking soil from high spots, putting in the low spots, and creating usable grades. It's typically done over the entire parcel or at least an entire phase of a project. We're putting good soil, meaning it's compactable, it's stable, it doesn't turn to mush when it's wet. We want to put that where we need it, like under roads or under house pads. Less good soil, like topsoil or muck, we can put in, park areas or boulevards or areas where it's not going to be a problem for the end use. This doesn't mean that the grading is done. There's always later fine grading, whether it's grading around the house after a house is built, or fine grading for that final road subgrade shape, or or digging a pond or shaping a pond to its final contours. There's always fine grading that happens. So this is, when we say mass grading, we're talking about the rough grading that happens early on in a project. Some of the timing and challenges, of course, you might guess it's the least expensive and time-consuming time to do the mass grading is before anything else is in the way. If you start plunking things in the way, it just gets more expensive, quality goes down. Another challenge is balancing cuts and fills. Dirt is cheap until you need to haul it somewhere. So if you can take from a high spot, put it in a low spot, and they kind of get both to where you want them, that's ideal. If you've got way more high than you've got low, or way more low than you've got high, you're either hauling dirt away to get rid of it, which is expensive, or you're bringing dirt in to fill a hole, that's expensive. Another important point here, wetland and other environmental rules are really strict, especially the wetlands. I've listed the sequencing here. If there's a big wetland in the way of your project, you have to first avoid it. If you can't avoid it and still meet the public purpose for the project, then you minimize the impact on that wetland. Once you've done that, anything that you do impact, you have to mitigate, and that's expensive. So wetlands are a big deal when it comes to grading.
And economic concerns can't be the sole reason, like, well, if I got rid of that wetland, I could put in more lots, or I could make the building bigger. That alone is not.
Yeah, that's not a defense. It has to be for some public purpose and really unavoidable. Grading work is really weather sensitive, especially here with the soils we have. So if you get a rainy day, you might lose 3 days of work. It affects the quality. Workers don't like it, of course. And of course, if the ground freezes, and that applies to the other things, but especially grading, the ground freezes, you're done. So what that means is, and we'll talk about these other things, not so much about the time, but there's a lot to do in one construction season if you want to get a project from A to Z. So you want to make sure you plan for winter in your scheduling. Maybe you could do this, but it would be so expensive that nothing would happen. So I just wanted to make sure that was thought about.
So I think Rich's point is that when you're going, well, it's August, there's all kinds of time. But if you're just starting this work in August, you have to get it all done. Otherwise, you're carrying it over into the following construction season, and there's construction financing, and then somebody has to carry those costs for like possibly 6 more months without making any progress on the project. So there's a big cost if you have to stop halfway through, so to speak, and can't get it completed within a single construction season.
Yeah. And then erosion and sediment controls. I'm guessing you hear about that from time to time, but it is a big deal on these projects. It's costly. It can be in the way. You've got silt fence everywhere. You've got sedimentation basins, you've got rock construction entrances, you have to sweep the pavement. All that stuff takes time and cuts into the normal progress, so they're kind of at odds, but the requirements are strict. And when we talk about erosion sediment controls, just quickly, we mean minimize your disturbed areas. Instead of opening up 100 acres to erosion, do it in smaller pieces if that's feasible. You want to put in erosion control things that what their purpose is to prevent that soil from dislodging in the first place. So when a raindrop hits it, it's not smashing it loose, it's just kind of dissipating because you got mulch on it or something. And then any sediments that do get dislodged, you want to keep them on site, and there's a whole host of different techniques for that. But ESC consists of all those things.
How many of these, like, requirements, prevention things, whatever the right word, I can't think of it. I mean, some of those are local controls, some of those are state, some of those are county, some of those are other things.
So
like,
BMPs?
How much do we have control of or influence over at the local?
So we have, in Elko New Market, we have 2. One is there's a state permit. Anything over an acre, they have to pull a state construction permit, and its purpose is to regulate erosion sediment control. That puts the onus on the landowner and the contractor to have a plan for controlling all this stuff. They have to do weekly inspections. clean it up when it's full, fix it when it's broken. But Elko New Market is an MS4 community. That means we have a separate permit, and I'm sure we've given presentations on this before. Part of that permit, we have to monitor these sites. So we actually send our own inspector out every 2 weeks to check on all their stuff, are their records up to date. They put together a report. It usually comes back non-compliant. It goes to Renee, it goes to the developer, and so we're constantly after them to keep this stuff up, because it's, I mean, frankly, it's a pain. It's important, but it is a pain.
So from a control standpoint, we have the burden of administration, but the requirements are generally state dictated.
Yeah. Sanitary sewerage. In this image, it's this green thing would be a person hole, and a little more on that. The green pipes are sewer pipes, so the main pipe runs down the middle of the street. You kind of lose it here because it goes into the pavement. And then the smaller pipes that go to each home are the service pipes. So when you take shower, water comes down here, goes into the mainline pipe and follows its way down through the system, through any lift stations. It ends up at Met Council wastewater treatment plant at, what's it called?
It'd be an Empire.
It's an, I can't remember the name of the plant, but we're very lucky here that we don't have to treat our wastewater locally. So I won't spend too much time talking about that financial issue, but the size of these pipes is based on the area that it's serving. So if a particular pipe has got sewage from 1,000 homes, it's going to be bigger than one that's coming from 30 homes. These pipes are durable. They're designed for periodic cleaning, but they can last 75 or 100 years if they're well taken care of and well designed. Timing and challenges. There has to be something, a pipe or a lift station downstream of the site to connect to. If there's not anything there, we're back to the developer either has to bring it to the site from wherever it is nearest by, or it's a premature project and the project stalls until something happens to get that pipe closer. And then we always require a developer to bring sewage pipes through the project so that the next guy doesn't have to fight a battle to get it up to his property. There's often oversizing or over depth. So if it's intended to serve a larger area that this project doesn't need, instead of an 8-inch pipe, it might be a 12-inch pipe. The city pays the difference in cost for that. Or if it would only need to be 16 feet deep to serve this development, but it needs to be 22 feet deep to serve the neighbor, we pay for that extra depth. Or if there's a lift station, which I think you can imagine, if you have a hill and there's a low spot on each side and you got to get sewage from here to here, you kind of run into real obstacles when you get into that 30-foot deep range or more. It gets really expensive because they have to move so much dirt out of the way to get the pipe in the hole. It's slower, it's less safe, it's hard to maintain, it's harder to get at to televise, it's harder to get at to jet. So that's not a hard and fast rule, but generally in that 25, 30-foot range, we start looking pretty closely at, is it going to be better off to put in a lift station and pump it over the hill rather than dig through the hill?
When Rich says that the city pays for that, that's what we collect trunk fees for from developments to pay for those types of system costs, oversizing, over depth, lift stations, and on the water side, it would be things like water towers, oversizing, pressure reduction stations, those types of things.
Yeah. So I was going to say, if a development comes in and some of these elements are in there, the city pays it. But if the money is not in that fund's account, the project will either be premature or delayed while we work out how to finance the city's piece of that oversizing. And then last point, sewage has to be compatible with collection and treatment systems. So normal domestic waste, if we get somebody that applies that wants to put in a food processing and they have really a high strength waste, for example, we probably couldn't take that unless they pre-treat it on site so that we don't damage anything downstream or in our system. Jump to the water system. Yeah.
Before we leave that, we're hooked up to the urban service area, and is that a 48-inch pipe? And if it is,
I think it's 42.
42, what would allow us to do here, because it is an advantage we have in development relative to some of the other communities that are gonna be on site, right?
A pipe that big could probably serve a community like Lakeville, and that's 80,000 people. Yeah, that's a big honking pipe.
Is that a technical term?
It is, yeah. Yeah, I learned it in college. It was from my roommate, but I did learn it in college. Now I lost my place. I got all excited. I'm putting this slide up, which is a little different than the pattern from the other ones, just because this shows the big ticket water items. So unlike wastewater, in the water department, we do have to supply our own water, treat it, store it, distribute it. And the big ticket items are gonna be things like a city well, which can be on the order of $1 million. Water treatment plant, so we take that raw water, we run it through the plant. If you're interested in this stuff, we can talk about it, but basically you're cleaning that water up or making it nicer or both, and then pushing it out into the system where it fills a water tower. That water tower stores water for emergencies, for sustaining system pressure, because it's always up in the air, so no matter where you are, it'll feel that gravity, and you open the tap, you get water. There's no need for air or pumps to run continuously. And then it also smooths operations. They can run the plant at a nice steady pace, say 800 GPM, instead of it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. So the tower provides a lot of benefits to the system. And then these pipes are just buried below the surface. We'll see that more, distributing the water to customers. So in this image, the blue pipe is water main. There's a small pipe that goes to each house, sort of like sewer, except it's putting water in instead of taking it out. There's a pipe that goes to every fire hydrant. That tends to be bigger because a bigger pipe's going to give you more flow, obviously. And there's a water main by pretty much every house in town. There might be a few oddballs with a long service, but for the most part, somewhere in front of your house or next to it, there's a water main. The size is based on the area served. An important difference from sewer here, sewer wants to all be branches. You don't want a networked sewer. You want it all coming into one, going on, all in one direction. A water system benefits from having loops, connections like a net instead of like a tree branch, so that if something happens on one or more flow is needed, it can come at that location from 2 directions or 4 directions or 6 or 7, whatever your network looks like. Same thing as if there's a problem and they have to shut down a block of water main. With a network, it can be routed around automatically. It just flows around and comes in a different way. So the long-term ideal would be to have pretty much a network system. Because of the age and growth stage of this community, you still have a lot of branch systems. And then valves. We don't want to overlook the importance of being able to shut off sections of the water main conveniently without having to dig them up and freeze them or something weird. So we install valves pretty frequently that allows Public Works flexibility to shut down pieces where they need to without unduly putting out more people than we need to. Again, there's got to be an existing pipe somewhere, ideally close to the edge of a development parcel that they can connect to bring water into the site. If they don't, they're back to a 2 situation. You find the closest and you got to bring it down a city street or some other way to get to that parcel. We try to avoid 2s by always requiring throughs. And again, oversizing comes into play, same concept as sewer.
But Rich, that's an important, I know, and it'll be something we talk about the next meeting, is the capacity, either upstream in the case of water or downstream in the case of sewer. If you don't build sufficient capacity ahead of time, you create bottlenecks for yourself in the long term with regards to servicing particular areas as you continue to develop as a city.
Yep. Yeah, networking softens that, but you still want to have some trunks and some larger lines to bolster that. And that's all planned out, so when the development comes in, we'll look at, okay, does this require a larger pipe through it? and would pay that oversizing accordingly. The last bullet on here is pretty important. I showed you a slide that illustrated what supply looks like, treatment and storage capacity. That has got to be adequate for a development to come in. If it's not, we'd have to call it premature until we can drill another well or add on to the treatment plant or whatever the shortage is. So we're always trying to look ahead, projecting what are our needs, are we gonna be adequate, can we meet it, what do we need to do, what happens if growth is faster, what if it's slower, what can we delay? Because those things require significant community investments up front before the development comes, probably before you know the development is coming. You suspect there will be development overall somewhere over time, but that's not a guarantee. So it's really a balancing act between making sure you're ahead of the curve, but not so far ahead of the curve that if that development has a delay in it, your ratepayers got to make up the difference. I don't know if there's any questions on that particular.
I do.
Yeah,
So we have a comp plan going out 20 years,
yep,
Yes.
and we have a sewer line that could possibly take us far beyond what the comp plan does, right?
yep.
So how do we address the potential relative to the cost of doing it now? Because we've got that tremendous capacity with sanitary sewer, but you still have to look at building your systems relatively affordable.
We've still got to get our wastewater in the community to that point. It doesn't run all the way through and everywhere. So we still have those issues. What do we need to oversize with this development to make sure? And so we do have that all planned out, what generally what our pipe sizes need to be. There might be a second look at the time when it comes to build it. But we have a plan that says, okay, we need a 24-inch over here and a 36-inch over there so that we can make sure to get these areas as we come in. If
So
that's,
that plan kind of operates almost exclusively on the comp plans because you're doing that plan for.
they go hand in hand. We know where the comp plan is saying the 2040 limit is. We design branch networks for sewer out to that far. That's irrelevant of timing. We just know at some point, whether it's 2040, 2050, when we get to there, we're gonna need, and we know what the land uses will be from the comp plan, so that it all gets kind of married together so we can see what kind of wastewater flows we expect and project a pipe size for those areas. So that if somebody comes in some part of town, we already have an idea, oh, we need to get an 18 pipe down there, not just an 8, and we work that into the development design.
But to your,
We-
I think we're gonna say the same thing.
Probably are.
To your point, Bob, is that because of that, we have an ultimate service area that goes beyond our 2040. And while the 20-year plan might get to at a more granular level of what that system might look like, there's always an eye to, okay, but how are we serving the area beyond that?
Yeah, that's,
I think
we
that's-
have it laid out to max out that pipe.
But, I mean, even with that, I mean, the two cities didn't merge, I mean, it was less than 20 years ago. So I think back, were they planning, so my similar question to what I had before is like, where do we have to replace some of the stuff that they maybe didn't predict?
So even prior to the merger, the cities operated under a joint sewer board, and the Met Council considered that, so.
So there may not be as many surprises as I,
Right.
could envision that there would be of two separate cities. I mean, in
No,
every
there are,
region.
there are surprises. Our system does reflect, and it gets to where you are. When a lot of the core infrastructure for the communities was put in, was in the 80s. And so you're looking at communities, what was their vision for the community in the 1980s? You had a
Our
combined.
vision now could be completely different. You fast forward 20 years and could be completely off. And
Yeah.
so then, how do we balance that of trying to predict with the knowledge that we have at the moment that we have it to make these decisions?
I think we're better because I think the issue was back then was not anticipating what the community might be in the future. You had communities that were combined population under 1,000 people. They had independent systems. And while they worked together on the joint sewer board, that was really just to treat it. The individual city systems were planned independently. They just went to the same point to collect, to go out and get treated. There's been a lot of work that we've done over the years. We have the issue, as you guys know, of two different pressure systems. There's the Elko pressure system because of pressure and where the water tower is located, and then there's everything else. And those are items, and those are some of the items we will talk about at the next meeting because they create limitations, and there are bottlenecks, so to speak, that we have to work around because there wasn't anticipated that, hypothetically, this sewer pipe wasn't just going to serve this 100 acres, but it might ultimately have to serve this 1,000 or more acres ultimately. Now, and we'll talk about this, the reality is sometimes you have to make decisions, as Rich was talking about, balancing what you're investing today versus the time frame you're working towards. And those are some of those policy challenges. But as we get into and start looking at the community as it is today, where we have infrastructure, where we expect development to occur, and what barriers we have to infrastructure, we'll dive into that in a much more granular level at the next meeting.
But it seems like it's making the argument too for the whole regional approach to all of this too. So we at the local level can complain about losing local control, but really having that regional oversight and planning, like the 2050 water supply stuff thing that they're meeting next week about, and just how we all need to think, because, I mean, I don't know if I would have ever guessed that Lakeville would be where it was growing up and graduating from Lakeville, and then how does that impact us? And so, as much as we all want to maintain our level of local control, there is some sense to doing a regional statewide plan, or, you know, whatever kind of regional plan.
On the sewer side, that was actually the impetus for the Met Council, was to address the sewer issues, and that was in like 69, because the issue was that individual cities were just treating it, and they were doing it to varying degrees of success. And so the idea of doing regional sewer planning with regards to how treatment is done and how you provide it was really the impetus. Everything else the Met Council does now is an outflow from that, because if you want to know where you need to have sewer, you have to have land use plannings. Thus, we had comp plans, and then.
But it makes sense
Yeah.
too, then why Met
Yeah.
Council is, you know, now we're doing transportation planning, so, because it's, I mean, so many of these things are interconnected.
It's
And we
all,
can-
yeah,
We can try to
Yes.
do what we want and think we're the most brilliant and whatever cost-effective city, but
you're not on an island, yeah. I'm gonna push on because
Yeah.
we have a long ways to go and a short time to get
we
there.
got 28 minutes,
Stormwater system.
right? They're here for the superintendent, not for the.
This is fascinating. I had no idea what was under my surface.
I know.
I want to get on that sewer commission for sure.
All right, so the orange pipes and structures are storm sewer. So when it rains, water runs off the rooftops, out into the street, runs off the street, goes into the catch basins, goes into these storm sewer pipes where it gets conveyed in almost every case, especially in our subdivisions, to a pond of some kind. The purpose of those ponds is to mimic natural conditions. As the water is running off when it's an alfalfa field, we want it to be kind of the same when it's houses or factories. So we slow it down, we keep what we can infiltrate it into the ground or let it go really slowly to mimic that. And we remove sediment and nutrients and stuff that we don't want flowing out of town. So those are important. They're not shown on here, but that's basically the stormwater management system. One thing I wanted to make sure you understood is that we don't size these pipes for every storm. That's just not practical. We typically pick a return year period of 5 years or 10 years, size the pipes for a storm that might happen that frequently, which still can be a pretty good sized storm. But anything larger than that, we always look for, well, I won't use what we actually call it. The emergency overflow is the official term. So if water is ponding in the street in a low spot and fills up, it doesn't run into a house window or something like that. It'll flow through a channel to a safe place without damaging any structures. So the EOF system is pretty important. If you ever hear us talk about that in a meeting, that's what we mean. Timing and challenges. So stormwater is different than sewer, water, or roads. It's almost always local, meaning 40-acre development's got to manage its own stormwater on its own site. Those ponds do occupy valuable real estate. If they take 3 acres out of the 40, that's 3 less acres for building houses. There are some regional systems in place. I can think of one. We may have another out by the school, but so a regional pond would be where it's meant to serve more than one parcel. The problem with those, you got to buy the land up front. You got to know where the best place to put it, where you're most likely to have development first, so that you're not holding on to that spent investment for decades and decades. You got to pay to build the thing, and then you got to have big pipes to get it untreated, unslowed down from a development site into that regional pond. So they're just not very practical, even though the idea is great. Yeah, it's going to be more efficient from a land standpoint to treat a bunch of parcels in one big pond than to have 20 little ones. But the practicalities of it don't work. We require developers to maintain existing drainage patterns. It's pretty rare that a site will have only one point at its boundary where stormwater runs off. Usually this area runs off this way and this area runs off that way and the south half runs off this way. They have to maintain those patterns. We don't want to starve a neighboring site or wetland of runoff. We don't want to inundate one with runoff. So they have to maintain the direction, but also the rate, volume, and quality as best we can with current technology anyway. And then the other thing, and you've seen this, neighbors are very sensitive to stormwater runoff locations and changes in rate, volume, or quality. So it's a big deal. It may not so much inhibit development on a particular site because it is local, but it's still pretty important and it's a big cost factor. Streets. I think they're self-evident on this image. Streets are typically the most expensive component of, we'll just call this a roadway corridor. They're the most expensive and they're the shortest lived. They're where the rain first hits, where the sun's always where the traffic is. That's what gets beat up. And they need a lot of maintenance. Functional class system, I won't go into too much, although it's just keep in mind that different roads have different purposes. The purpose might be on one end purely mobility. We want to get people from that end of town to that end of town as quickly as possible. That's mobility. That means higher speeds. When you have higher speeds, you're going to want fewer driveways, wider lanes, straighter alignments, flatter grades. And more traffic means you're going to want a thicker and more robust pavement section, so more costly. Lower speeds means safer access. That means a narrower road, narrower right-of-way, driveways, parking, stuff like that will tend to slow that car down that's traveling and make it more safe for those folks that live on it. A street consists of the underlying grading, so down underneath this blue zone, that has to be firm and stable and well compacted. Then there's a sub-base that we have in town that's usually about 2 feet of sand to help spread the traffic loads more uniformly on that typically less stable, it's stable but it's not as strong as base, that's subgrade. Then we have base layers and then the paving layers. There's usually 2 layers of asphalt. The base course, which I'll talk about in a second, and then the wear course. And then, of course, the curb and gutter. On an urban section, like you see in this image, with curb and gutter, runoff goes to the gutter and flows down the gutter into a storm sewer. On a rural section, like you might see on Xerxes north of town or Dakota north of town, you have a roadway with ditches on each side. Those ditches receive and carry the runoff from the road surface and from the adjacent land if it's flowing that way, and bring it to usually a creek or some low spot where it can flow safely away from the area. So they have some commonalities, but most of our local roads are going to be urban sections like this. We do allow on major collectors whose primary purpose is mobility to use rural sections because we don't need the parking. We don't need the curbs. We We just want to keep that traffic moving two ways. All right, timing and challenges. No street, no access. So you can't build a factory or a home without a street. Streets are seldom the limiting factor in capacity, or they're not the main thing we worry about when a new development comes in, or what's the traffic. We don't worry about the street as much as we worry about the intersections. What's this new road, when it intersects with that existing road, gonna do to the traffic in that intersection? Or even to an intersection that's a mile away, if it's contributing to a couple of major roads that are already kind of iffy, and we're adding more. So we think about that type of thing more so than a 2-lane road. Even if it's lower speed, will still handle a heck of a lot of traffic. But when you pile them all together at a corner, that's where we tend to see the problems. Keep in mind that even here, jurisdictions differ. We've got city roads, township roads, county roads. Each jurisdiction wants to protect the function of its roadways. So in the case of Scott County, for example, they have pretty strict limits on where we can connect to a County Road 2 or a County Road 91 or a County Road 2. It's not willy-nilly. It's a minimum, I don't need to go through the details, but that might mean extra road to get back to a site that's in the corner, because you can't connect to that county road without going a quarter mile down the road and coming back up with a local road.
I'm not advocating for this, but is there workarounds to, or
Oh, we always look for workarounds, but we also respect the reasons they have those rules, because we rely on those roads to get in and out of town too.
to respect our,
Yep. I mean,
but
County Road 2 is the lifeblood of this town. If you muck that up with a bunch of accesses that impede traffic, you're not helping anybody, except maybe the one guy that wanted it. So yeah, we got to be really careful about that. But a roundabout, for example, you recall that helped us to have not so far down to spacing, because they could go right out, go around the roundabout, make the south. We didn't need the full. There's things like that that always get discussed, but as a general rule, they're fairly strict about that. Where was I? Oh, streets need to consider all transportation modes, not just cars. And we've got an example coming up right now, which we can talk about next time, but you build a development, you bring a road to it, there's gonna be other people trying to use that road, and there may be places it's not safe, so we gotta think about electric scooters, pedestrians, bicyclists, baby carriages.
are we at a place yet where we have to start factoring in autonomous vehicles, or is that still too far off where we don't have to factor that into our planning?
Table that, will ya?
My quick retort is that autonomous vehicles should be adapting to us. Otherwise, it'd be easy to stop and just put your foot out in traffic and you shut down the freeway. Anyway, keep in mind, streets are high maintenance. We've got to police them. We got to plow them. We have to do preventive maintenance like crack sealing and patching. And we have to rehab them, every 20 years or so, kind of build a new surface or take off the existing surface. And maybe every 35, 40 years, we got to rebuild them. So they just, no matter what we do, there's no good way to make them last as long as the pipe's under the ground. You probably have a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio of pipe longevity to road longevity. Higher function roads can really be challenging. Now I'm talking about major collectors, those mobility roads with higher speeds, flatter grades, heavier sections. Developers are far more willing to dedicate right-of-way and build a road if they can put driveways on it, because they can sell lots to help justify the cost of that road. But as soon as you say no driveways, you got to build separate roads with driveways, and this is the main thing. That gets tough. So the value of that land and its end product has to be really high for them to justify investing in a collector road through their development. But we have no other mechanism. Unlike sewer, water, storm sewer, where we can charge a trunk fee and a connection fee. We can't charge fees for transportation to developers to help distribute those costs of those roads that benefit everybody to everybody. So it's either the developer builds it or he don't build, or the taxpayers pay for that road, or some combination. Our policy to now is that developer is required to build these roads if they want to develop a parcel and a road is indicated there.
Collector roads end up being one of the biggest challenges for development, because if you think about it, you have the sewer line or you have a lift station, you've collected or will collect from this area to build this item here that serves all of that. Roads are very linear and you need this chunk before you can get here. So you've already seen some of the concept plan for the property between Dakota and Nevada on Dakota Avenue. That property will touch Dakota Avenue. At some point, Dakota Avenue will have to be improved. If somebody in between hasn't improved it, it's premature. They're gonna have to build it up to them or adjacent to them, or the taxpayer's gonna have to. And of course, we don't want the taxpayer to do it, so that place an additional burden on development. And essentially what it becomes is the first guy in or the last guy out usually has a disproportionate burden as it relates to those higher class roads.
Well, the other things it does is it either delays development or reduces what they can afford to pay for the land, so it'll delay the sale, or reduce what a landowner can sell his property for. And we can talk about that next time, but yeah.
I mean, and this gets kind of the street fee impact or street impact fee.
That's
type
related,
rate
directly
that-
related
yeah.
to that
Yeah,
issue for development.
I'm gonna push on. The other stuff. If you look under the sidewalk, we've got communications lines, we've got gas lines, we've got electrical lines. That all gets put in after the main part of the street is built. Then they'll come, if you're lucky, they'll pour a sidewalk and build the driveway aprons over it. Talk about the problems with those a little bit. Pavement markings, you can see in the background, there's some crosswalks, there's a stop sign. Here, we only allow that stuff or prove stuff that meets the Minnesota Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. Deviations from that manual can lead to non-compliance. Josh has heard this speech 100 times. Increased demands for enforcement and less safety. Putting up a stop sign where you don't need one not only does no good, it's almost politically impossible to take them out. Street lighting at intersections or curves are not so much about illumination. What they do is you're driving your car, you see a street light splashing on an intersection of it, it tells you something's different, take it easy, or there's a curve, take it easy. It can help pedestrians with some illumination as they're crossing the street, but they're really, at least here, our policy is we install street lights for traffic safety. We don't do decorative pedestrian scale lighting, except maybe through the downtown we have some. Let's see, the important thing here, gas or electrical availability for a commercial industrial project, that can be a significant deal. If somebody wants to build in some part of town, but there's no gas supply in that area that can meet their needs, it can cost millions to drag it over there. We ran into that on a smaller scale, but on recent development, we needed to build a lift station. Ideally, we want three-phase power for that. Nearest three-phase power was a mile away. It would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars to bring that in, so we ended up having to do a different type of system to make that work. Sidewalks and driveway aprons, sometimes the developer's willing to put them in before the homes, but they can really get damaged easily by, there's just heavy equipment running across them all the time. But at the same time, we don't want to have the homeowners or their builders build it, because you get a checkerboard of sidewalks, and some may never get completed, so you got a gap for 150 feet that sits there for 2 years. So we do require the development to put it in, but we've been flexible whether they do it before building permits or after, but we'll hold security till it's done. I already mentioned traffic signage and markings. You would be surprised that one of our biggest challenges in recent years has been boulevards. We want them to look nice when a project is done, and as they start building homes, they get tore up. You can't keep the grass, you can't keep the wheel tracks out. So we've been escalating our requirements to try and get ahead of that. But that is it's a pain in the neck. And besides that, when the grass gets damaged, now you have erosion and it's running in the streets, it's in the gutters and filling up the catch basins. So we did make some changes to our standards to hopefully improve that, but that's been a big problem. And then, you may already know this, but pedestrian ramps where a sidewalk meets a curb are a big deal. There's really strict requirements for the width and the configuration and the slopes and the ramps and the slope of the pavement. And they are expensive, so we want those done right the first time. We don't want to be back in 3 years replacing them because they didn't meet a standard and now they're long gone. So if we do a city project and you see a bid item for a ped ramp and it's $6,000, that's why. I'm done. Tom already told you phase 2 will start applying some of this new knowledge around town. So you can see perhaps why things aren't just springing up right and left everywhere. One of them that I didn't talk about too much, so I'm gonna ask my own question. What about wetlands, Rich? How big a problem are they really in Elko New Market? They're a huge problem. Because what I talked about, you can't just plow it in for economic purposes, even if it would be cheaper. And we have a ton of them. I can't think of a project we've done that doesn't have one, at least one. And some have dozens. So, it's a big deal, and it really affects right-of-way layout, road layout, grading, stormwater management. They're also a blessing. They're wildlife habitat. They do improve water quality, there's no doubt. They're aquifer recharge benefits. But it's at odds with smooth and cheap development.
Today, I've been doing research on lot sizes. So I've been talking to a lot of developers and a lot of other communities. And one of the cities I talked to today said they couldn't approve any more plats, or they couldn't approve any more developments because they need a new water tower. So that's just one example.
The fiddler must be paid at some point. We're okay for a while, but we're planning one in 27, so for that reason.
And one of the national builders, during one of our conversations, he said that some time in the last decade or so, the stormwater requirements were increased, so they take more land now than they did, 10 years ago.
Within my career, that has been the field where things have changed the most, is stormwater rules. Way different than it was when I started. Yeah, Bob?
Relative to stormwater and being at the headwaters of the Vermilions or in that watershed, which drove a lot of the metro sewer thing, I don't know if it's appropriate for this discussion, obviously now, but is that something that is going to be burdensome or cumbersome or whatever as we go on, because maybe we're going to be impacted more than some other communities might, or is that kind of?
The way it has worked and will continue to work is that we've got a comp plan update coming up in the next few years. So we'll update our rules based on different guidance we're getting from Met Council, maybe some preliminary kind of things that the watersheds, we're actually in at least 3 watersheds here, Vermilion, Scott WMO, and Cannon. Cannon hasn't been, they haven't really had any rules or anything that applied to us, but the other 2 have. So we write our rules, our code, best we can to match those. They review it, and then we gain a concurrence. Then we're the LGU, but it's already been pre-reviewed and kind of, so our rules are okay with them, if that helps. So it's all coordinated. I don't know what tricks they might have up their sleeve at this point. Usually there's a good reason for the different rules. If there's not, we duke it out until there's consensus, so.
Well, I remember we ran into the cold water stretch of the Vermilion, and that, even though it's down in Farmington, it impacted us here. And that's,
Yeah.
again, for another topic, but
Yeah.
it's something, if it's going to be a limiting factor because of the way
We,
we can have that runoff.
we studied the maps and found a 10-acre, over 10-acre lake in between that our runoff passes through, which was one of the reasons we were able to not have temperature requirements on ours, so.
But there have been impacts, Bob, related to surface water. One, because we're in the Vermilion watershed, we're a small portion of the county, which is in that. And so we're subject to an agency who the vast majority of the area they have jurisdiction over is in a different county. And so our representation on that ruling board, as you know, is, because you served on it, is limited. And then the other issue that we have is that the nature of the watershed and how it functions is very different that way than it functions here. Dakota County's a big gravel pit, we're a big pile of clay. And so sometimes getting sensitivity with regards to, they want to apply the common set of regulations everywhere, but it functions differently. So sometimes we have to ask for them to be accommodating and recognize that there are differences within the watershed. The other area is close to 20 years ago, we were made an MS4 city. That was a mandate. We normally wouldn't be an MS4 city, so that places an additional burden on us from a reporting and regulatory standpoint that we would have not otherwise had. That being said, as we continue to grow, we would naturally become an MS4 city. So there are some challenges, but I don't know that they would largely limit our capacity for development. More of a,
It's probably, a tweak to a rule here and there. Might mean a little less density, but it wouldn't stop things.
Any other questions for this round? The only last one I have is the emergency overflow, the AKA, what is that also known as? And I looked through it into Copilot and didn't come up with anything funny or.
Is it appropriate?
It might be what you say if you dropped your wallet in the creek.
That's what I wrote down, but I just wanted to verify. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Nothing else on the agenda, I believe. So we will adjourn at 6:57.